My name is Renee, and I'm 29 years old. I never thought my mother would say those words to me. If it weren't for you, I'd have a happy life. 7 words that shattered everything I believed about our relationship. After years of trying to be the perfect daughter, those words cut deeper than any knife. I left the dinner table in tears that night, not knowing that walking away would be the first step toward finding myself. If you're watching this, drop a comment letting me know where you're from. Hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to heal from painful words spoken by someone who should have loved you unconditionally. Let's talk about how sometimes the most hurtful words can lead to the most powerful transformations. Growing up as the only child of a single mother wasn't easy, but I never realized just how complicated our relationship was until I was much older. My mother, Margaret, raised me on her own after my father left when I was just 2 years old. I have no memories of him, just a faded photograph my mother kept in a drawer. Margaret worked multiple jobs to keep a roof over our heads and food on the table. She was a receptionist during the day and waited tables at night. Sometimes she'd pick up weekend shifts cleaning houses in the wealthy neighborhoods across town. I spent a lot of time with babysitters or at after-school programs waiting for her to pick me up. From a very young age, I understood that my mother had sacrificed her dreams for me. She had wanted to be a nurse, but pregnancy and single motherhood derailed those plans. She never let me forget it either. I could have been something she'd say while paying bills at the kitchen table if I hadn't had to raise you alone. Those casual remarks planted seeds of guilt that grew into a forest of insecurity. By elementary school, I was convinced that my very existence was the reason for my mother's unhappiness. I became determined to make her life easier, to somehow make up for the burden I represented. I excelled academically, bringing home perfect report cards that I hoped would make her smile. Sometimes they did, and those rare moments of pride in her eyes became what I lived for. "At least you're smart," she'd say, as if that somehow made up for the trouble of raising me. I learned early to be low maintenance. I never asked for expensive clothes or toys. I didn't beg to join dance classes or sports teams that would require her time or money. I became self-sufficient, making my own lunches and doing my own laundry by the time I was 10. I cleaned the apartment without being asked, hoping to lift some of the weight from her shoulders. Our relationship during my teenage years was tense, but functional. While other girls fought with their mothers over curfews and boyfriends, I studied and stayed out of trouble. I had friends, but I rarely brought them home. Our apartment was small, and my mother was often tired and irritable after work. I didn't want to bother her, and I didn't want my friends to hear the way she sometimes spoke to me. When it came time for college, I chose a state university close to home, even though I'd been accepted to schools with better programs farther away. The local option came with a scholarship that covered most of my tuition, and I could continue living at home to save money. I also knew that despite her complaints, my mother relied on me emotionally. I did the grocery shopping, kept the apartment clean, and provided the companionship she lacked after years of focusing solely on raising me. Margaret's behavior toward me was often hot and cold. Some days she'd be almost loving making my favorite dinner or asking about my classes. Other days she'd slip into bitter reminiscing about all she could have accomplished without the burden of motherhood. I never knew which version of my mother I'd encounter when I came home. Throughout it all, I built my identity around being the good daughter. I was the one who never caused trouble, who always put her mother's needs first, who worked hard to make her proud. I thought if I could just be perfect enough, do enough, achieve enough, my mother would finally be happy. And maybe if she was happy, she would love me the way I desperately wanted to be loved. What I didn't realize then was that my mother's unhappiness had nothing to do with me. It was a void I could never fill no matter how hard I tried. But that understanding would come much later after the night that changed everything. Despite the challenges of my home life, I managed to graduate college with honors, earning a degree in marketing. I was proud of myself for this accomplishment, especially since I'd worked part-time throughout my studies to contribute to household expenses. The day I walked across the stage to receive my diploma, I searched the audience for my mother's face, hoping to see pride there. She attended the ceremony, but spent most of it checking her watch later, complaining about how long it had taken. Still, graduation marked a turning point. With my new degree, I landed an entry-level position at a prestigious marketing firm in the city. The salary wasn't amazing, but it was enough to rent a small studio apartment about 20 minutes from my mother's place. Moving out was a difficult decision fraught with guilt, but I framed it as a practical choice, rather than a bid for independence. It's closer to work, I explained to my mother as I packed my belongings, and you'll have more space here without all my stuff. She had huffed and made comments about ungrateful children who abandon their parents, but ultimately didn't try to stop me. I still visited her weekly, bringing groceries and cleaning her apartment. Our routine continued, just with more physical distance between us. The marketing firm proved to be an environment where I thrived. My attention to detail and willingness to work hard caught the attention of my supervisors. Within a year, I was given more responsibility and a modest raise. For the first time, I felt valued for my contributions, a stark contrast to my home life where nothing I did ever seemed quite enough. It was at a work function that I met David. He was a software engineer whose company had hired our firm for a rebranding campaign. We were seated next to each other at a networking dinner, and conversation flowed easily between us. He was kind with a quiet confidence that I found attractive. When he asked for my number at the end of the evening, I surprised myself by giving it to him without hesitation. Dating David was like stepping into a different world. He came from a stable, loving family with parents who supported his choices and siblings who teased him affectionately. The first time he invited me to a family dinner at his parents' home, I was overwhelmed by the warmth and easy laughter that filled their house. His mother hugged me when I arrived, a genuine embrace that made my throat tight with emotion. As our relationship deepened, David began to notice things about my interactions with Margaret that I had long since normalized. "Why do you let her talk to you that way?" he asked gently after witnessing one of my mother's cutting remarks during a dinner we had invited her to. "She doesn't mean anything by it," I had defended automatically. "She's had a hard life." David shook his head. "Having a hard life doesn't give anyone the right to treat you like you're a burden, Renee. You deserve better." His words planted a seed of awareness that slowly began to grow. I started to see my relationship with my mother through David's eyes, and what I saw was troubling. The constant criticism, the guilt trips, the subtle ways she undermined my confidence and independence, it all formed a pattern of emotional manipulation that I had been blind to while inside it. Around this time, I received a significant promotion at work, becoming the youngest account manager in the firm's history. The achievement boosted my confidence and expanded my social circle as I began attending industry events and building my own client relationships. I was finding my voice in professional settings, learning to advocate for my ideas, and take credit for my work. This growing independence seemed to displease my mother. Her comments became more barbed, her demands on my time more insistent. When I couldn't come over because of work commitments, she would accuse me of thinking I was too good for her now. When I did visit, she would find ways to diminish my accomplishments or change the subject when I talked about my successes. David encouraged me to consider therapy, suggesting that it might help me navigate the complicated feelings I had about my relationship with my mother. At first, I resisted, feeling that seeking help would somehow be a betrayal. Eventually, though, after a particularly draining phone call with Margaret left me in tears, I made an appointment with a therapist who specialized in family trauma. Dr. Landon helped me see that the dynamics between my mother and me weren't healthy. She introduced concepts like emotional abuse and parentification, the process by which a child is forced to take on the role of caretaker for their parent, that helped me understand my childhood in a new light. With her guidance, I began to untangle my sense of self-worth from my mother's approval, a painful but necessary process. As I grew stronger and more self-aware, my relationship with David deepened. After 2 years of dating, he proposed during a weekend trip to the coast. The ring was beautiful, but even more beautiful was the look of absolute certainty in his eyes when he asked me to spend my life with him. I said yes without hesitation, feeling for the first time that I was choosing my own happiness without guilt. When I called my mother to share the news, her response was typically mixed. "Well, I suppose this was inevitable," she said after a brief congratulations. "Just don't expect me to pay for anything. I don't have money to throw around like his family probably does." I assured her we weren't expecting financial contributions, trying not to let her response dampen my joy. David and I decided to have a small engagement dinner to bring our families together, hoping that perhaps meeting David's warm, supportive parents might inspire my mother to put her best foot forward. Looking back, I realize how naive that hope was. The engagement dinner was set at Le Jardin, an upscale French restaurant with soft lighting and white tablecloths. David and I arrived early to greet our guests as they arrived. His parents, Robert and Susan, came first, bringing a bouquet of flowers and enveloping me in warm hugs. "We're so happy you're becoming part of our family," Susan whispered in my ear, bringing unexpected tears to my eyes. My mother arrived exactly on time, dressed in a new outfit I hadn't seen before. She air-kissed my cheek and handed me a small gift bag containing a pair of earrings that had belonged to my grandmother. "Something old for the wedding," she said with a tight smile. "They're probably not as fancy as what you're used to now, but they have sentimental value." I thanked her sincerely, touched by the gesture, despite the barb embedded within it. David greeted her warmly, either missing or choosing to ignore the coolness in her response. He introduced her to his parents, who made genuine efforts to make her feel welcome. As we were seated at our table, I found myself watching my mother, anxiously hoping she would see how kind David's family was and respond in kind. At first, things seemed to be going well. Margaret answered Robert's polite questions about her work and nodded along as Susan showed photos of their family vacation home where they had offered to host our wedding. But as the evening progressed, I could see my mother's facade slipping. Her smile became more fixed, her responses shorter. When the conversation turned to my recent promotion at work, which Robert and Susan enthusiastically celebrated, Margaret interjected. "Renee always was ambitious," she said with an edge to her voice. "Even as a child, she was never satisfied with what she had." I felt David's hand squeeze mine under the table as an uncomfortable silence fell. Susan deftly changed the subject, asking about the engagement ring, which led to the story of David's proposal. As I recounted the romantic beach setting, my mother sipped her wine and looked increasingly agitated. The tension continued to build through the main course. Margaret made several passive-aggressive comments about how different David's upbringing had been from mine, emphasizing the financial struggles she had faced as a single mother. Each time I tried to steer the conversation to neutral ground, feeling a familiar knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. After our plates were cleared and dessert was served, Susan brought up wedding plans. "We'd love to help in any way we can," she offered warmly. "Our home is yours if you want it, but we understand if you have other ideas." "That's so generous," I replied, genuinely moved by their support. "We're still figuring out the details, but we're thinking something small and meaningful. Just make sure you don't forget who raised you when you're playing happy families with your new in-laws." My mother cut in, her voice sharp. "Some of us sacrificed everything to give you the life that led you here." The table fell silent. David's father cleared his throat uncomfortably while his mother looked down at her plate. David began to say something, but my mother wasn't finished. "If it weren't for you, I'd have a happy life," she continued, looking directly at me. "I could have been somebody. I could have had a career, traveled, met someone who actually stayed. But instead, I spent 29 years putting you first, and now you're just going to waltz off with your perfect new family and forget all about me." The words hit me like a physical blow. I couldn't breathe for a moment, my chest constricting painfully. Tears sprang to my eyes, hot and sudden. All the years of trying to be enough, of attempting to fill the hole in my mother's life that I believed I had created, crashed down around me. In that moment, I saw with crystal clarity that nothing I could ever do would be enough. Without a word, I placed my napkin on the table, stood up, and walked out of the restaurant. I could hear David calling my name, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't bear to sit there for one more second, pretending that those words hadn't just shattered something fundamental inside me. The cool night air hit my face as I pushed through the restaurant doors, tears streaming down my cheeks. My hands were shaking so badly that I dropped my keys twice before managing to unlock my car. I slid into the driver's seat, but didn't start the engine, unable to trust myself to drive in this state. Instead, I sat there gripping the steering wheel as sobs racked my body. All those years of trying to be the perfect daughter, of molding myself to fit the shape of what I thought my mother needed, had led to this moment. Despite everything I had done, everything I had sacrificed, she still blamed me for her unhappiness. The realization was both devastating and strangely liberating, like a painful bandage being ripped off to reveal the truth underneath. A tap on my window startled me. It was David, his face creased with concern. I unlocked the door, and he slid into the passenger seat, immediately pulling me into his arms. "I'm so sorry," he whispered into my hair. "What she said was cruel and untrue. None of that is your fault, Renee. None of it." I clung to him, unable to speak through my tears. After a few minutes, there was another tap on the window. David lowered it to reveal his parents standing there, their faces radiating concern and compassion. "We wanted to make sure you were okay," Susan said gently. "What happened in there?" She shook her head, seemingly at a loss for words. "Your mother is still inside," Robert added. "She says she doesn't understand why everyone is so upset. She says she was just being honest." A fresh wave of pain washed over me at his words. Even now, after what she had done, my mother couldn't acknowledge the hurt she had caused. In her mind, she was the victim, always the victim. "We don't have to go back in," David assured me. "We can go home right now." I nodded, wiping my eyes. "I just need a minute to pull myself together." Susan reached through the window to squeeze my hand. "Take all the time you need. And Renee, what your mother said reflects on her, not on you. You are a wonderful person who deserves love and happiness." Her kindness brought fresh tears to my eyes, but these were different somehow, almost cleansing. Robert and Susan said their goodbyes, promising to call the next day, and walked to their car. David drove us home in silence, one hand on the wheel, the other holding mine. I stared out the window at the passing streetlights, feeling hollow and exhausted. When we reached our apartment, I moved through the motions of getting ready for bed, mechanically brushing my teeth, washing my face, changing into pajamas. Sleep didn't come easily that night. I lay awake replaying my mother's words over and over. "If it weren't for you, I'd have a happy life." The sentence echoed in my mind, each repetition cutting a little deeper. David held me as I cried on and off throughout the night, not trying to fix anything with words, just being there, solid and present. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in my career. Then I made another call to my therapist, Dr. Landon, explaining what had happened and asking for an emergency session. She agreed to see me that afternoon. As I sat in her office recounting the events of the previous night, Dr. Landon listened intently, her expression compassionate but unsurprised. "What your mother said was emotionally abusive," she told me frankly. "It's the culmination of a pattern that's been present throughout your relationship. You've been carrying the weight of her unhappiness on your shoulders your entire life, Renee. But her happiness is not and never was your responsibility." "I feel like I'm breaking apart," I admitted. "Like everything I thought I knew about myself and my life is a lie." "What you're experiencing is a necessary shattering," she replied. "Sometimes we need to break down the false structures we've built before we can create something authentic and strong." After our session, I made a decision. I needed space-time away from everything to process what had happened and what it meant for my future. With David's support, I arranged to take a week off from work. A colleague had a small cabin in the mountains about 3 hours from the city that they offered to let me use. "Are you sure you want to be alone?" David asked as he helped me pack a small suitcase. "I need to be," I replied. "I love you, and I'm so grateful for your support, but I need to hear my own thoughts right now." He nodded, understanding as always. "I'll miss you. Promise you'll call if you need anything anytime, day or night." I promised, kissed him goodbye, and drove into the mountains seeking solitude and hopefully some kind of clarity. The cabin was rustic but comfortable, with a small kitchen, a fireplace, and a bedroom overlooking a peaceful lake. As I unpacked my few belongings, I felt both terrified and relieved to be alone with my thoughts for the first time in what felt like forever. That first night was the hardest. Without distractions, without the need to hold myself together for anyone else's sake, I finally broke down completely. I sobbed until my throat was raw and my eyes were swollen, releasing decades of pent-up grief and anger. I screamed into a pillow, giving voice to the rage I had never allowed myself to feel toward my mother. I wrote pages and pages in my journal, pouring out every painful memory, every cutting remark, every moment I had felt small and unworthy. It was a necessary purging, painful, but cathartic. And when I finally fell into an exhausted sleep as dawn was breaking over the lake, something had shifted inside me. I had reached the lowest point, questioning my very worth and right to exist. But somehow, I was still here, still breathing, still fighting. The next few days in the cabin marked the beginning of my healing journey. After the emotional breakdown of that first night, I woke late the following day feeling physically drained, but mentally clearer than I had in years. I made a simple breakfast and took it out to the small deck overlooking the lake, watching the sunlight dance on the water as I ate. For the first time, I allowed myself to really examine my childhood and my relationship with my mother, without immediately making excuses for her behavior. I started a new journal chronicling memories as they came to me, noting patterns I had never recognized before. I remembered how my mother would withdraw affection when I showed independence, how she would sabotage my achievements with criticism, how she would become mysteriously ill when I had important events that took attention away from her. The isolation of the cabin provided a kind of freedom. There was no one to please, no one to take care of, no one to protect from my emotions. I could be angry, I could be sad, I could be confused, and the trees and the lake absorbed it all without judgment. I had arranged for daily phone sessions with Dr. Landon during my retreat. Our conversations were anchors in the sometimes turbulent sea of self-discovery I was navigating. What you're describing is a classic emotionally abusive parent-child relationship, she explained during one call. Your mother used you as an emotional crutch, making you responsible for her happiness while simultaneously blaming you for her unhappiness. It's a no-win situation for the child. But why? I asked the question that had haunted me my entire life. Why couldn't she just love me? Your mother's behavior isn't about you, Renee, Dr. Landon said gently. It's about her own unresolved trauma, her own inability to take responsibility for her life choices. You were never the problem. You were just a convenient target for her displaced feelings. These insights were both painful and liberating. They forced me to re-examine my entire life through a new lens, one that placed the responsibility for my mother's unhappiness where it belonged with her, not with me. David called each evening a connection to the life waiting for me beyond this temporary retreat. He never pushed me to come home, never made me feel guilty for needing this time. Instead, he listened, offered support, and reminded me that I was loved. I miss you, he would say, but I'm proud of you for doing what you need to do. Take all the time you need. His unconditional support was a stark contrast to what I had grown up with, and it helped reinforce the new understanding I was developing about what healthy love looked like. By the fourth day, I found myself thinking about the future. What did I want my relationship with my mother to look like going forward? Could there even be a relationship after what had happened? I spent an afternoon making a list of boundaries I would need to establish if I were to continue having my mother in my life. No more guilt trips, no more blaming me for her life choices, no more using me as her emotional support at the expense of my own well-being. The list was long, and as I wrote it, I wondered if my mother would be capable of respecting any of these boundaries. That evening, I did something I had never allowed myself to do before. I made a list of my positive qualities, my strengths, my achievements, and my contributions to the world. At first, it felt uncomfortable, almost wrong to acknowledge my own worth so explicitly. But as the list grew, something inside me began to strengthen and solidify a sense of self that existed independently of my role as Margaret's daughter. I am kind, I wrote. I am hardworking. I am resilient. I am a good friend. I am a talented marketing professional. I am worthy of love and respect. These simple affirmations became a daily practice, a way of rebuilding the self-esteem that had been systematically undermined throughout my childhood. The turning point came on the sixth day of my retreat. I woke early and took a long hike around the lake, watching the morning mist rise off the water. As I walked, I realized that I had been living my entire life seeking my mother's approval, trying to fill a void in her that could never be filled. I had constructed my identity around being the good daughter, always putting her needs above my own. But what if I chose myself instead? What if I directed all that energy, all that care and consideration toward my own well-being? What if I accepted that my mother might never give me the unconditional love I craved, but that didn't mean I wasn't deserving of such love? The thought was simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating. It meant letting go of a lifelong pattern, stepping into unknown territory. But it also meant freedom, a chance to live authentically unburdened by the weight of my mother's expectations and disappointments. When I returned to the cabin, I called Dr. Landon and shared my revelation. "I think I'm ready to stop trying to make my mother happy," I told her. "I'm ready to focus on my own happiness." "That's a profound shift," she responded. "How does it feel?" "Scary," I admitted, "but also right. Like I've been carrying this heavy backpack my whole life and I'm finally setting it down." We discussed practical steps moving forward, establishing clear boundaries, practicing self-compassion, when the inevitable guilt arose surrounding myself with supportive people who affirmed my worth. On the seventh day, I packed my bags, cleaned the cabin, and prepared to return to the city. As I took one last look at the peaceful lake, I felt different from the broken person who had arrived a week earlier. I wasn't fully healed, the journey would be long and complex, but I had taken the first crucial steps. I had begun to see my worth as independent from my mother's validation. I had started to believe that I deserved happiness, not as a reward for pleasing others, but simply because I existed. The drive back to the city felt symbolic, a return not to my old life, but to a new version of it, one where I would prioritize my own well-being and surround myself with people who genuinely cared for me. One where, "If it weren't for you, I'd have a happy life," would no longer be a sentence that defined my worth. After returning to the city and spending a few days readjusting to normal life, I knew it was time to have a conversation with my mother. I couldn't move forward without addressing what had happened at the dinner and the deeper patterns it represented. Dr. Landon helped me prepare for this difficult discussion, role-playing various scenarios and helping me develop strategies to stay grounded if things became emotional. "Remember," she advised, "you can't control how your mother responds. You can only control your own actions and reactions. Your goal isn't to change her or make her understand you're setting boundaries for your own well-being regardless of whether she accepts them." I arranged to meet my mother at her apartment on a Saturday afternoon. I chose her territory deliberately, wanting her to feel secure and less defensive. I also knew that I could leave if the conversation became too toxic, something that would be harder for her to do if we met on neutral ground. As I drove to her building, my stomach churned with anxiety. Part of me wanted to cancel to avoid the confrontation and continue the avoidance stance we'd been doing since the dinner. My mother had called once during my week away, leaving a voicemail that was more defensive than apologetic. "I don't know why everyone's making such a big deal out of what I said. Call me when you're done being dramatic." I hadn't returned the call, sending a brief text instead to let her know I was taking some time for myself and would be in touch when I returned. Her response had been typical passive-aggressive guilt tripping. "Fine. I guess I'll just sit here alone wondering if my only daughter is okay." Now, as I parked outside her familiar apartment building, I took a few deep breaths to center myself. I wasn't here to accuse or attack. I was here to speak my truth and establish the boundaries I needed to protect my mental health going forward. My mother opened the door with a wary expression that quickly shifted to a forced smile. "Well, look who finally decided to show up," she said, stepping back to let me in. "I was beginning to think you'd forgotten you had a mother." I didn't take the bait, instead, moving calmly into the living room and taking a seat on the couch. "Thank you for agreeing to talk with me," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "What happened at the engagement dinner was significant and we need to discuss it." My mother sighed dramatically, sitting across from me in her armchair. "I don't see why everyone's so upset. I was just being honest about how hard it's been raising you alone." I took another deep breath. "Mom, when you said, 'If it weren't for you, I'd have a happy life,' it hurt me deeply. It made me feel like my very existence is a burden to you, like nothing I've ever done could make up for the fact that I was born." "That's not what I meant," she protested, though her eyes slid away from mine. "You're twisting my words." I'm telling you how your words made me feel, I corrected gently. And it wasn't just what you said at dinner. It's been a pattern throughout my life. You've consistently made me feel responsible for your happiness or unhappiness, and that's not a fair burden to place on a child or even an adult child. My mother's face hardened. So now I'm a terrible mother after everything I sacrificed for you. This isn't about labeling you as a good or bad mother, I explained, sticking to the script I had practiced with Dr. Landon. This is about recognizing that our relationship isn't healthy in its current form. I've spent my entire life trying to make you happy, feeling guilty when I couldn't, and it's taken a significant toll on my mental health. Oh, so I've damaged you now. Her voice rose, taking on the familiar defensive tone that usually signaled the beginning of a guilt trip. I worked 3 jobs to put food on the table. I gave up everything for you. And this is the thanks I get a psychology lecture about how I've ruined your life. I remained calm, though my heart was racing. Mom, I appreciate the sacrifices you made. I know raising me alone wasn't easy, but those were choices you made as an adult. I didn't ask to be born, and I can't be responsible for the life you feel you missed out on because of those choices. My mother stood up abruptly, pacing the small living room. You have no idea what it was like, she said, her voice cracking slightly. Being abandoned with the 2-year-old, having to drop out of nursing school, watching all my friends move on with their lives while I was stuck changing diapers and working minimum wage jobs. For the first time, I didn't rush to comfort her or take on her pain. Instead, I acknowledged it without accepting responsibility for it. That sounds incredibly difficult, and I'm sorry you went through that. But it wasn't my fault, Mom. It was circumstances, Dad's choices. Maybe even your choices, but not mine. She stopped pacing, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. You sound different, she said finally. What happened to you up in those mountains? I started to see things clearly, I replied, including the fact that I can't keep trying to fill a hole in your life that I didn't create. I love you, Mom. I want to have a relationship with you, but it needs to be a healthier one, with boundaries and mutual respect. Boundaries, she repeated the word like it was foreign. So what, you're going to stop taking my calls, stop visiting, abandon me like everyone else has? I shook my head. That's not what boundaries mean. It means I won't accept being blamed for your unhappiness anymore. It means I expect to be treated with respect, not criticized or guilt-tripped. It means I'll walk away from conversations that become toxic, but I'll always be willing to re-engage when we can communicate healthily. My mother sat back down suddenly, looking very tired and much older than her 55 years. I don't know how to be different, she admitted, a rare moment of vulnerability. This is how my mother treated me. This is all I know. The admission surprised me. My mother rarely spoke about her own childhood or her relationship with my grandmother, who had died before I was born. Your mother made you feel responsible for her happiness too? I asked gently. She nodded, staring at her hands. Nothing was ever good enough for her. She was bitter about her life, her marriage, everything. And somehow it was always my fault. She looked up at me, a flash of recognition in her eyes. And I've been doing the same thing to you, haven't I? It was the first time my mother had ever shown any awareness of her behavior patterns. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak past the sudden lump in my throat. I don't want to be like her, my mother said softly. I don't want you to feel about me the way I felt about her. But I don't know how to change. It's like it's hardwired into me. In that moment, I saw my mother clearly, perhaps for the first time, not as the all-powerful figure of my childhood, who could build me up or tear me down with a word, but as a wounded person who had never healed from her own childhood trauma. There's help available, I said. Therapy has been really valuable for me. It could be for you too. She scoffed weakly, but without her usual dismissiveness. At my age, what's the point? The point is that it's never too late to heal, to build a better relationship with yourself and with me, if you want to. There was a long silence as my mother seemed to consider this. I don't know if I can change, she finally said, but I don't want to lose you. That dinner when you walked out, I was angry at first, but then I was scared. scared that you wouldn't come back. I'm not giving up on you, Mom, I assured her, but I am asking for changes in how we relate to each other. I can't keep being the target for your frustrations and regrets. It's destroying me. My mother nodded slowly. I can try. She said the words clearly difficult for her. I can't promise I'll be good at it, but I can try. It wasn't a dramatic breakthrough or a tearful reconciliation. My mother didn't suddenly transform into the nurturing parent I had always longed for. But it was a start, a small crack in the defensive armor she had worn for as long as I could remember. As I left her apartment that day, I felt a lightness that had nothing to do with my mother's tentative commitment to change. It came from within me, from the knowledge that I had spoken my truth, set my boundaries, and done so with compassion, but without compromising my own worth. Whether or not my mother could meet me in this new territory, I had taken a crucial step in my own healing journey. Walking to my car, I called David. It went okay, I told him. Better than I expected, actually. But regardless of what happens with her, I know I'm going to be okay. And for the first time in my life, I truly believed that. In the months that followed, David and I moved forward with our wedding plans. We decided on a small, intimate ceremony at his parents' lake house, with only our closest friends and family present. The planning process was a joy unmarred by the anxiety that had characterized so many of my interactions with my mother in the past. My relationship with Margaret entered a new phase, one of cautious rebuilding. True to her word, she did try to change, though progress was inconsistent and often frustrating. At my suggestion, she started seeing a therapist of her own, though she was private about what they discussed in their sessions. There were still difficult moments. Old patterns don't disappear overnight, and sometimes my mother would slip back into blame or guilt tactics. The difference was that now I recognized them for what they were and had tools to respond effectively. Sometimes that meant calmly pointing out the behavior. Other times it meant ending the conversation and trying again later. Occasionally, it meant taking a break from communication entirely for a week or two, when things became too toxic. I maintained my own therapy sessions with Dr. Landon, working through the deep-seated beliefs about my worth that had been implanted during my formative years. Healing isn't linear, she reminded me when I felt discouraged. There will be setbacks and difficult days. The important thing is the overall trajectory. As our wedding day approached, I had to make a difficult decision about my mother's role in the ceremony. Traditionally, she would have a prominent place, but given the fragile state of our relationship, I wasn't sure that was wise. After much reflection, I decided to include her, but in a limited capacity. She would attend as the mother of the bride, but I asked David's mother to help me with the traditional mother of the bride duties like dress shopping. To my surprise, my mother accepted this arrangement with minimal protest. I understand, she said when I explained my decision. I haven't earned the right to those special moments. Maybe someday, but not yet. It was one of the most self-aware statements I'd ever heard from her, a sign that perhaps her therapy was having an effect. On our wedding day, surrounded by people who genuinely celebrated our love, I felt a sense of peace I had never known before. David and I exchanged vows beside the sparkling lake, promising to support each other's growth, to communicate honestly, to choose each other every day. As I looked into his eyes, I knew I had found someone who saw me clearly and loved me completely, not for what I could do for him, but simply for who I was. My mother sat in the front row, her expression a complex mixture of emotions. When the ceremony concluded, she approached me somewhat hesitantly. "You look beautiful," she said, and for once there was no qualifier, no subtle criticism hidden within the compliment. "Thank you, Mom," I replied, accepting the small gift of her uncomplicated approval. "I'm trying to be happy for you," she added, her voice low. "I really am. And I'm sorry that's still hard for me sometimes." The admission of her struggle, offered without making it my responsibility, felt like a significant shift. "I appreciate that," I said, squeezing her hand briefly before moving on to greet other guests. In the year following our wedding, I found myself drawn to helping others who had experienced similar family dynamics. I started a support group for adult children of emotionally abusive parents, creating a safe space where people could share their stories and healing journeys. What began as a small gathering in a community center grew into a network of mutual support that brought unexpected meaning to my life. David supported this new passion wholeheartedly, often handling dinner preparations on evenings when I facilitated group meetings. "You light up when you talk about the group," he told me. "It's like you've found your calling." Perhaps he was right. There was something profoundly healing about using my painful experiences to help others find their way toward self-worth and healthy boundaries. The group members became a chosen family of sorts, bound by shared understanding and the common goal of breaking destructive patterns. My relationship with my mother continued to evolve with progress and setbacks in roughly equal measure. There were still times when her words or actions triggered old wounds, but increasingly I could see these moments for what they were: her limitations, not my failings. I maintained my boundaries firmly but compassionately, no longer willing to sacrifice my well-being for the illusion of familial harmony. When I discovered I was pregnant about 18 months after our wedding, I approached the news with a mixture of joy and trepidation. Parenthood represented both a beautiful new chapter and a complex emotional challenge given my own childhood experiences. Would I know how to be the parent my child needed? Would I unconsciously replicate patterns from my own upbringing? David held me as I voiced these fears. "You are not your mother," he reminded me. "You've done so much work to understand yourself and heal. That alone makes you different, and we'll figure it out together day by day." His confidence bolstered my own, and as my pregnancy progressed, I found myself thinking deeply about the kind of mother I wanted to be. I didn't want my child to ever feel responsible for my happiness or to question their inherent worth. I wanted them to feel secure in my love, to know that my support was unconditional. Telling my mother about the pregnancy was its own challenge. Part of me feared she would somehow make this news about herself, about becoming a grandmother, rather than about the new life David and I had created. But when I shared the news during a Sunday lunch at her apartment, she surprised me. "Are you happy?" she asked after the initial congratulations. "Yes," I replied. "Nervous, but very happy." She nodded, a faint smile touching her lips. "Then I'm happy for you. That's what matters." It was a small moment, but it represented a shift in our dynamic. For perhaps the first time, my mother was acknowledging my feelings as the priority, not her own. As I enter the third trimester of my pregnancy, I find myself reflecting on the journey that began that night at the engagement dinner, when 7 devastating words, "If it weren't for you, I'd have a happy life," shattered my world and ultimately set me free. The healing process continues daily. There are still moments when I catch myself slipping into old patterns, seeking external validation, or taking responsibility for others' emotions. But now I recognize these tendencies for what they are: the echoes of old wounds, not truths about my worth. I've learned that a parent's unhappiness is never a child's fault. Children come into this world innocent, deserving of love and care simply because they exist. Adults make their own choices. And while circumstances can be challenging, blaming a child for one's unfulfilled dreams or disappointments is a profound abdication of parental responsibility. I've discovered that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away, not permanently or punitively, but temporarily, to protect your spirit and gain perspective. Leaving that dinner table in tears was not a moment of weakness, but the first step in reclaiming my life and my sense of self. Most importantly, I've come to understand that family is not just about blood, but about how people treat each other. David and his parents, my support group members, my closest friends. These people have shown me what family truly means: mutual respect, genuine care, the freedom to be authentic without fear of rejection. As for my mother and me, we continue our careful dance of reconciliation. Some days are better than others. I don't know if we'll ever have the relationship I dreamed of as a child, but we have something more honest now, something based in reality, rather than obligation or fear. And perhaps that's enough. The child growing inside me will never doubt their place in the world or question if they are loved. They will know boundaries and respect honesty and compassion. The cycle of emotional abuse that traveled from my grandmother to my mother stops with me replaced by a new legacy of healing and wholeness. If you've ever been hurt by someone who should have loved you unconditionally, know that their words reflect their wounds, not your worth. If you've walked away from a dinner table in tears or a relationship that diminished you, know that this can be the first step toward finding yourself. If you're working to break generational patterns of hurt, know that your efforts matter even on the hardest days. Have you experienced a moment that both broke and freed you? Share your story in the comments below. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. If this resonated with you, please subscribe, and share this video with someone who might be struggling with similar family dynamics. Together we can break cycles of hurt and build lives of authentic joy. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember, your existence is never a burden. It's a gift to this world.